The Almost Daily Zencast, hosted by the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo. Today's episode, The Calling. What is it? Hello and namaste. Thank you for tuning in. Raise your hand if you would rather transcend politics entirely. If you would rather transcend politics entirely because you have realized the following. And if you have not realized the following, do not take this as an indictment of your intelligence. Just ponder the statement. It is my humble opinion that all political ideology as it operates now is mental slavery designed to keep everyone fighting each other instead of organizing, unifying, and collaborating to create real solutions. I talk about this all the time, right? So my question to you is, wouldn't you just rather transcend politics? So, it is my opinion that we are living through an era of radical opportunity, and that we are facing a calling, that a calling is being sent out into the world, and we have a choice to either engage in it or neglect it. The issue is, what is that calling? There's a lot of people's opinions out there, and some of them make sense and some of them don't make sense, and depending on where you're starting from, it could be any of them that make sense. It could be any of them that don't make sense. Let's set most of them aside, though, because if they have to do with power, control, winning, fighting the good fight, I humbly suggest to you that they are not the most significant of callings, that they are potentially distractions from the calling. It is my humble opinion, and I invite you to consider this, not blind faith believe it. I invite you to contemplate it and wrestle with it and see if it makes sense for yourself deep down. I think that the calling of our generation, the calling of this historical moment, the calling that begs the human species to unite is that of spiritual healing. Now, that to many might be a very vague label. What does that mean? What is spiritual healing, and what does it mean to say that that is the calling of our day? Let's discuss on the other side of the official intro to the show. This is the Almost Daily Zencast. Hello and namaste. Thank you for tuning in to today's episode. I am your humble host, the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo. Let's get started. Meditation. Now, I talk about that a lot. I've had episodes where I've invited you to try a meditation practice. But why am I talking about it right now? In my humble opinion, the real calling, the challenge that we face is to radically reinvestigate and rediscover that which meditation provides, that which meditation opens us up to, that which meditation can allow us to experience. And that if there were one methodology or one idea or one kind of practice out there in the world that would bring us to this spiritual healing that we're talking about, it is meditation, right? Now, of course, there's a bunch of different kinds of meditation practices, many schools of thought about meditation, but I mean in the most meaningful yet broadest sense. Now, lots of people meditate. On Insight Timer, my preferred meditation app, after checking out several meditation apps, that's the one I like the most. On Insight Timer, there are, I think, 14 million members of that community around the planet meditating. So what does the calling then mean to those of us who are already meditating? It is my humble opinion that it is now the challenge to double down, to triple down, to really push past whatever place we think we've achieved, whatever level we think we've gotten to with meditation, and to really set it all aside and rediscover meditation yet again. Because if there's one thing I've come to understand about reality, is that it's very easy to take something that is powerful and awe-inspiring and magical and get so used to it, so comfortable with it, that it becomes, what's the right word here? That it becomes almost a smaller version of itself, a less significant version of itself. In other words, there's two big important things that any one of us could do right now, and that's if we already engage in some kind of meditation practice, then we are being asked to explore further, to educate ourselves more, to look beyond that which we are already comfortable with, and to dig deeper. And if we don't meditate at all, right now we're being invited to sit down and check it out and investigate it and figure out why it is that those of us who do meditate think it is important. And that there's a nexus there, right? There's a community of people who meditate already. And there's a community of people that might be somewhat conversant in the idea, but not really invested in it. Might be aware of meditation, might be comfortable with it as a thing that people do, but maybe aren't really doing it deeply themselves. And that there's an opportunity for those two groups to Venn diagram into a stronger unity. Why do I think that's the calling? Because as I've said before, and I'll have to say again, I'm sure 1,000 times, we cannot solve the problems created by politicians, generated through politics, with more politicians doing more politics. If we could, we would be problem-free by now, wouldn't we? Now, I understand that the going logic is that there's always more to fight for. That's never really made a lot of sense to me. Who are we fighting? Ourselves? Each other? Our neighbors? Our family? Why are we fighting them? Why aren't we healing those that we conceive of or perceive as the bad guys, right? The thing that politics has done, the thing that our political echo chamber system of ideological mental slavery has achieved, is to bifurcate us into splintered groups that are convinced of their own self-righteousness. My group is the right group. It's the best group. It's the one with the best ideas, the most righteous plan, and the only possible solution to the problem. And everybody else's groups are wrong. What has that done for us besides perpetuate all the problems that we create for ourselves? And yes, occasionally we make some, quote, progress. And that's great. I'm not trying to pan progress. It's wonderful that we have made the progress that we have made. But does it really make sense to keep fighting each other? Does it really make sense to keep stabbing at these wedge issues? Does it really make sense to continue pitting ourselves against one another when we could, in fact, heal ourselves, heal each other, and heal the species? Why is it so easily dismissed, that idea? Why is it that most people laugh at healing? That's my biggest concern today in this environment, that everywhere I share my thoughts on social media, there seems to be three general groups of people. Those who are already on board, but may or may not have a cohesive, comprehensive understanding of the how, the details, the practice. But they get it. They're like, yeah, we need to do something that heals. And then those who are so busy, caught up in the political echo chambers, that they don't have time to even consider healing. And those that are outright dead set against it for some reason, and have rationales and argumentations about how hippie, new age, woo-woo nonsense will never solve anything. We need to transcend those divides, right? But we cannot transcend those divides by fighting each other. Those will, as history will show quite clearly if you look at it with an honest, non-partisan, non-ideological viewpoint, history proves that fighting each other about ideas just perpetuates more fighting each other about ideas. Let us set down our intellectual weapons and set aside the act of fighting each other about ideas. And let us sit down together to really, truly, rigorously reinvestigate, rediscover, and re-implement spiritual practices that heal. Because they're out there, they exist. People have experienced them, but the majority of the mainstream is so caught up in mainstream culture, which is driven by ideology that is apparently, it seems to me, designed to reject, avoid, marginalize, criticize, ridicule the very proposition that I'm making. That's why people who are engaged in political shitposting just laugh off the very idea of healing. But it cannot be denied that there is deep spiritual pain everywhere. You are not alone if you are experiencing deep spiritual pain. It is not yours alone to suffer. The whole species is coping with generations upon generations of spiritual trauma. And if we continue to sidestep the effort required, if we continue to neglect the work that is necessary, collectively speaking, as a whole species, then we will not solve anything. Until we can really unite around a collective healing of the species, then we will just keep repeating history and making 2 steps forward, 4 steps back kind of political progress, which to date has not actually solved the problems that politics has created. If politics could solve the problems that politics creates, then we wouldn't have income inequality at all. We wouldn't have gender inequality at all. We wouldn't have racial inequality whatsoever. And yet, here we are, it's 2020, and those are at the core of what everyone's arguing about. So instead of arguing about it, why don't we set down the entire system and flood the world with healing spiritual effort? Flood the political system with spiritual healing work. Now, some people might nod in agreement, but still not know what to do about that. And trust me, I know what that feels like. It's daunting to be like, yes, I get it, but also I don't know what to do about it. And the simplest thing when you are in that position that you can do is stop, breathe, meditate, and invest in some profound, transformative self-forgiveness. And that sounds a little indulgent, right? That sounds a little bit self-oriented. But if you cannot forgive yourself for your own flaws, if you cannot confront your flaws and work through them and heal them, where are we? How are we going to get to the collective healing? And that I say from experience, right? I myself am to this day continuing to do what I suggest, which is to work imperfectly and make gains, however flawed, in that department. And while some people might say that I've made zero progress in recent years, they don't know the totality of the story, right? And deep down, deep within, the trauma is older, more profoundly pervasive, and more challenging than most people realize, than we even give credit for. Even those of us in the, quote, spiritual community, even those of us who out there that call ourselves, quote, healers. So I invite you to consider this proposition that as we live through the most divisive, most conflict-generating electoral process in modern American history, those of us who already feel comfortable with this modality, spiritual healing, quote unquote, as a general modality, let us redouble our efforts, let us double down, quadruple down, and let us reach out for help. Let us help each other, and let us not forget to help those in the political spotlight. So that's like a gauntlet I'm throwing at the spiritual community, right? The non-spiritual community, the challenge there, or the calling there, is to lift ourselves up from being non-spiritual into a spiritual place. For those of us who already think we're doing that, the calling, the challenge, is to double check that we really are, and that we're not just half-assing it, and to realize that we can't coddle ourselves there, that we really have to explore work, meaningful work, that not only heals us, but also is targeting those out there in the public realm who may or may not be specifically interested or particularly focused on these issues. Because we are all networked together, as I've talked about in other episodes. If you're interested in that, make sure you check it out. The human species is not one of rugged individuals. That's just a perceptual flaw. The human species operates on multiple dimensions for which we don't have very much science, but for which our indigenous ancestors had a lot of direct phenomenological knowing. And that's one of the areas that we really need to tackle, right? We need to stop, in my humble opinion, we need to stop debating things in terms of externalized evidence and start focusing on having direct phenomenological experience. That's something that I have felt in alignment with and also felt way out of whack with, right? Some days I feel like I am connected. to turn a phrase there. And some days I feel like I am very disconnected. And that's the challenge at every step of the spiritual path, is that you'll never get an easy fix. You never get a permanent dose of like, boom, happiness and bliss and euphoria forever, because it isn't about those things. We easily misinterpret that which we think we are coming to understand. The spiritual path is not about happiness. Happiness is an interesting and adorable and often beautiful emotional side effect or choice, depending on which way you're groping, and depending on which way you are addressing the world, right? It can be integrated, and it should be. And in fact, an integration of the reactionary kind of happiness and the choice-based kind of happiness is an indication of spiritual healing. When you think it's only one or the other, or worst case, you believe that happiness can only be brought about through the inputting of other stuff, that you can only be happy if you have the perfect partner or the perfect car or the perfect job, then you're really not understanding and or working with the healing process very well, because you're still making your happiness contingent on something other than yourself. A truly integrated individual understands a few things that, transcend the standard models. Like, we're not actually individuals. We are individuals, but we are more than just individuals. It's a tricky, difficult dynamic to talk about because, as I like to point out often, duality and non-duality are misrepresented, even amongst spiritual circles, as mutually exclusive things. That we either exist in duality or we've crossed some threshold and exist in non-duality. And that's a way of setting an artificial goal. The artificial goal being someday you will achieve crossing over into non-duality. But to the best of my understanding, and admittedly I could be wrong, but I'm inviting everyone to contemplate this to see if perhaps it might be actually accurate. To the best of my understanding, duality and non-duality are mutually co-creating each other at all times and always coexist. So happiness is always both a reaction and a choice. So if we're struggling being happy, then it's because we're not addressing the co-creative nature of our reaction and our choice. We're trying to exclude one in favor of the other for some reason. Healing is not a reaction to drugs taken. The drugs help and facilitate and boost the ability of that which the human body is already innately capable of. And according to some spiritualists, at which, again, could be wrong, I'm not one of those people that wants to categorically throw out all medicine, right? I think we should just not categorically throw out spiritual healing either. In fact, I'm suggesting, with my duality, non-duality as an example, the reason I bring that to the table is because we do that to things in life all the time. We say, well, either you believe that the only way to heal is some sort of spiritual magic, or you believe that the only way to heal is medical science. And why is there this artificial, mutually exclusive wedge driven between the two? To me, that makes no sense. Why aren't we integrating medical science with spiritual healing? That makes sense to me. Why aren't we learning from medical science everything we can learn that's real and isn't just a drug covering up the symptomology, right? Because that's not healing. Like, painkillers don't heal. They block pain. That helps you maybe get through your day. That helps you not feel pain, but that's not necessarily solving the problem, right? And so, instead of ripping those two things apart, why aren't we figuring out how to integrate them? Integration, I think, is the solution. But in order to truly integrate two apparent mutually exclusive things, we need to set them both down first and relieve ourselves of our misconceptions. We must abdicate our inaccurate mental models. We must purge our minds of beliefs that filter our perception. Because if we don't do that first, how can we then see clearly? How can we then perceive truthfully? How can we then communicate accurately? We can't. So there's a fractal recursion there, right? In order to solve politics, we need to set aside political ideology. Then we can return to the genuine, authentic activity of, to use a different term than politics, civic organization. If we can actually focus on useful, productive civic organization that benefits the plurality, the totality of humanity, then I think we will find solutions to the problems that politics built. But if we keep fighting each other about which political ideology is the most righteous, all we will see is enemies attacking our righteous political ideology. And that goes for all political ideology. Now, I am always adamant about reminding everyone that we cannot throw out the baby with the bathwater. When I say abdicate, I do not mean burn it to the ground. I do not mean outlawing political parties or any such exaggerated reactionary measures. It's just like with the problem with, this idea that politics is broken, therefore we must have a bloody revolution. Like, that's always been simmering in the background. And if you're not aware of that, you should tune into it, because there are people who genuinely believe that that is the only way. People really, really think that to solve the problems, we need to light it all on fire and burn it to the ground and start over. And I think that's ridiculous, because we've done it before. And guess what? Here is what it's gotten us to. And so I want to close today's episodes with this, a warning against choosing violence as a solution. The system wants all y'all to choose violence. The system is prepared for your violent revolution. The system itself sold you any and all weapons that you might use in that bloody revolution. The system has already and will continue to profiteer on whatever violent action the people bring against it. And the system will laugh at us as it does so. The system has spent generations upon generations programming us all to think that the only choice as a solution is violence. That only violence will solve anything. And this is in spite of the fact that 5,000 years worth of evidence of violence being perpetuated on ourselves by ourselves proves that it does not solve anything. If violence solved anything, why are we living through more violence now? So we must reject violence as a solution. We must reject violence as a solution, and we must speak publicly against all those who are armed to the teeth and voting for violence as a solution. And then we must bring to the public discourse that question which none of the bloody revolutionaries care to hear. What is the one thing that, quote, the system, I like to call it, whatever, the New World Order, the Illuminati, the bad Illuminati, because there is a good Illuminati, whatever. The system, whichever government, whichever politician, might be part of it, what is it that they actually deep down seriously fear? In my humble opinion, they fear spiritual healing. If they didn't fear spiritual healing, they wouldn't spend so much time, money, and effort distracting you from your own spiritual healing. That's what I've got to say about that today. Forgive me if you're a longtime listener and today's episode was a bit redundant. And if you're a new listener, welcome to the show. Buckle in, it gets crazier. Until next time, I have been your humble host, the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo.